CBRM train number 100, the Missionary Ridge Local, which serves to East Chattanooga and return. We're presently pulling out of Grand Junction here. On the left-hand side of the train, as we ride backwards, it'll be a go right. You see Grand Junction Station. It was constructed by the museum in the early 1980s. It's a loose replica of the 1888 station that still stands in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. On the right-hand side of the train is the modern-day Norfolk Southern Main Line. That line was constructed between 1949 and 1953 by Southern Railway to bypass the 3 miles of track we'll be traveling over today, as well as 4.3 additional miles of tracking on the Belt Line that are longer trips traveled over. As we are leaving Grand Junction, you'll see our display yard, all our coaches. This was all built new by the museum. Of note, you'll see the 98 over there, the Baltimore and Ohio car. It's blue and red with a tarp over it. It was built in 1917 for the president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. It's got a bath on board. It's Cuban mahogany panels throughout, stained and lead glass work inside, fine brass and nickel light fixtures in there. That's how the railroad elite travels. We are leaving Grand Junction. The gravel pathway you see there on the left-hand side of the train is in fact the original alignment of this line as first spiced down by the East Tennessee and Georgia Railway in 1858. That later became the East Tennessee, Virginia and Georgia Railway, and in 1894 on the famous Southern Railway. Chattanooga was quite floodplain at this time prior to the TVA's dam. Prior to the TVA's dam and hydroelectric construction scheme. So the Southern Railway made the decision to elevate the line up to its current height, which they did in 1906 to get that above flood stage, which culminated with the construction of a bridge roughly 360 feet in length and usually between 60 and 70 feet above the water of South Chickamauga Creek. So we'll be coming out on that bridge momentarily. On the left-hand side of the train, you will see the stone bridge piers that carry the previous lower bridge. And on the right-hand side of the train, you will see the bridge and tracks of the Tyner branch, T-Y-N-E-R. That line of bridge was built in 1942 to service the then new Volunteer Army Ammunition Plant, which was constructed to supply TNT for the war efforts, and did so from the Second World War up to early Desert Storm. The line was built by the National Chattanooga and St. Louis Railway, which is today part of CSX. That line connects with the Western and Atlantic, actually right up here. You'll see where it goes to the WNA. That's the main line between Chattanooga and Atlanta. This line connects that line to the Volunteer Army Ammunition Plant was. Today that's home to Enterprise South Industrial Park, where Volkswagen, ADM, TAG, Stamp, and some other manufacturers are still located. On the left-hand side of the train, we're passing McCarty Siding. This is today the only point of double track on the route. However, until 1953, this entire line was double track. And when you consider it saw up to 70 trains per day during the Second World War, with freight trains running between 40 and 60 miles an hour, passenger trains running up to 80 miles an hour, double track for bi-directional running was absolutely imperative. That was one of the upgrades from the 1906 rebuilding. However, right in the center of the line, you had a single track tunnel, a major bottleneck, hence why they built that bypass I mentioned earlier. We're passing over our second line, our second bridge over the Western and Atlantic line, the WNA, was the first rail line completed into the city of Chattanooga in the year 1850 as the Georgia State Road. It is still owned by the state of Georgia to this day, although they now lease it out to CSX Transportation, who pays about $12.5 million a year to operate that line. The state still owns it, and as such, the line almost didn't make it to Chattanooga, as the state of Tennessee was not keen to allow the Georgia State Railroad to cross their state borders. But thanks to the lobbying efforts of Honorary Colonel James Anderson Whiteside, one of the fathers of the city of Chattanooga, who also was a Tennessee state legislator, they were granted a charter in 1836, and the railway came to town in 1850. Again, on the right-hand side, we're passing Allied Metals here. They're a freight customer on the line, so we do ship freight here at the museum. We ship very heavy boxcars of steel and zinc to Allied Metals there. And we also park some historic locomotives and other equipment there. One of them will be passing up here is locomotive 8669. It is turning 80 years old this month. It was built in 1945 by the American Locomotive Company for the United States Army Transportation Corps, one of 157 locomotives built during the Second World War for overseas operations. They saw service in places such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Soviet Union, France, and in the case of 8669, Belgium. It later operated for the Anniston Ordnance Depot in Alabama, and then went to the Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, where it was. So it was donated to the museum in 1978. repaired those, got it running again in 2022, but a water leak has again sidelined the locomotive. Very historic unit there. Speaking of freight and allied, as I mentioned earlier, this railway was double track but had a single track tunnel right in the center of it, so that was a major operational bottleneck, coupled with the fact that as the 20th century grew on, freight cars and locomotives became considerably larger, which in many cases meant they were too large to fit through the tunnel. Southern Railway looked at deepening the tunnel but was unable to do so due to conditions on the bridge, hence why they built that bypass and abandoned this route at the end of 1953. Now, the largest obstacle that abandonment posed for the museum to reopen the line was at a place known as Tunnel Boulevard, so named because the roadway tunneled beneath the railway. But when the line was abandoned, there was no longer a need for that tunnel, so the city of Chattanooga daylighted it, where they dynamited the roof off, leaving a huge open chasm where the railway had been. Although the museum was founded in 1961, really got going about 1966, 68. It was not until 1977 that we were able to construct that bridge under which the train was passed, which thus enabled us to reopen the entire 3-mile stretch of line. Prior to that, trains went 1 mile, they then stopped and simply backed up. So that was a major accomplishment. Now on the left-hand side of the train, you'll see the embankment heading out into the woods there. That's the original 1850s right-of-way once again. The navvies had a hand grade everything when that line was built in 1850, so the surveyors took the path of least resistance, which led to a very clearly route. When Southern Railway rebuilt the line, however, in the early 1900s, they had dynamite, heavy earth-moving equipment, steam shovels, the whole lot, which meant that they could make the line straighter, which they wanted to do because they had locomotives that could run much faster if they had a straight track. So they made the line nearly arrow straight, with the exception of one fairly major curve, today known as Hunziker Curve, after Louis Hunziker, an early TBRN member, whose ashes were spread here after his passing. And the point of that one curve is to get the new straightened right-of-way back onto the original for about a 1,000-foot stretch. And that's because the same conditions that meant they could not widen that tunnel also meant they couldn't build a new tunnel. Otherwise, they could have made the line perfectly straight, build a new double-track deep-bore tunnel, and this line would still be in service today. They couldn't, so you'll soon hear the sound of locomotive 710's Leslie RS5T horn blows 5 notes at once to announce our approach to that aforementioned tunnel there. The horn there is announcing our approach to Whiteside, or later simply Missionary Ridge Tunnel. It's 986 feet in length. Every inch of it was hand dug by predominantly Irish labor between 1856 and 1858. So hold your breath and make a wish, because it's tunnel time in Tennessee. Feel free to shine any electric lights. You may have maybe a torch or a mobile telephone, and you'll see the hand carved stonework as well as a partial brick lining in 1888. For anyone curious, the first train passed through the tunnel on the 9th of August, 1859, and dynamite was invented in 1867, 8 years later. It was too wet here to use gunpowder. Curious, there are less than 18 inches between the train and the side of the tunnel wall. We have the open window coach on here. It's imperative that nobody sticks their head out of. With that, we found ourselves on the west side of Missionary Ridge. Of course, you must consider this was the way into Chattanooga from Knoxville, so there were long passenger trains coming through here, freight trains, mail trains, hence why the single track tunnel was a major operational bottleneck. Right about where we are now, the track opened back up into double track at VM Tower. We just passed the remaining foundation of VM Tower on the right-hand side of the train. As we approach, what was once known as Sherman Heights, but it was a small wooden station. It's long gone now, however. One thing that does remain from Sherman Heights is a locomotive. It was built in 1887 by Baldwin as the East Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia Railway's 419. In September of 1890, it was leading a freight train, not that where we are right now, when the old Lincoln pin couplings broke apart. Whilst the crew was busy attempting to get the train coupled back together, they neglected the 419 and let it run out of water, causing it to suffer an absolutely catastrophic boiler explosion, which flung bits of locomotive and crew up to some distance away. The locomotive was only about 3 years old, so it was rebuilt with a new boiler for another 40 years for the Southern Railway. They renumbered it 107 in 1897, and continued to operate it until they sold it to the Knoxville, Sevierville, and Eastern Railway, had it until 1959, and it was then placed on display at the Rebel Railroad, today Dollywood, in 1961. And it sat by the Parkway in Pigeon Forge for decades. It used to be when I gave this tour, I would tell people that it still was there, but earlier this year, its ownership was transferred to a tourist railway with the intent of returning it to operation. So it's no longer still sitting at Dollywood. Up until earlier this year it was, and that's the engine that blew up outside our tunnel and killed its crew because of their negligence. So we've just crossed our fourth and final bridge and over Arno Street, which means we'll soon be arriving into our East Chattanooga Yard and station. However, if we look to the right-hand side of the train, you'll see the tracks heading down the hillside. That's the tracks of the East Chattanooga Beltline. Some of our longer trips continue on down those. Our award-winning dinner train runs both Friday, Saturday, some Thursday and Sunday nights as well, 4 additional miles, down to the Sculpture Garden at Polk Street. The food's all cooked on board in the kitchen of one of our vintage dining cars, one of which holds the distinction of being the oldest continuously operating dining car in the country, and its claim to fame was making meals for President Franklin Roosevelt on his trips to Warm Springs. We also take along our 1920 Pullman, the Clover Colony, an honest-to-goodness heavyweight Pullman sleeping car. At one time, there were over 7,900 of them in service. Today, it's one of less than a dozen that is still intact, restored, and operational. We have our Chickamauga turns. They go 16 more miles down the track behind one of our vintage diesel locomotives to the town of Chickamauga, lay over in town there, chance to climb to the top of Wilder Tower at the battlefield. And for the steam fan, we have the Somerville Steam Special. It goes 49 more miles down the line behind one of our authentic coal-fired steam locomotives. You'll see them both here at the shop in just a few moments. It's an all-day trip. A number of coaches, first-class car usually, dining car, lovely breakfast, luncheon, a real nice little day for the 100-mile round trip. We're not heading on down that track today, however. We're coming into our East Chattanooga Yard. We'll be here for about 25 minutes. This is a working rail yard, so it's imperative that during the layover here you remain with the group at all times, behind any and all yellow lines and chains. Please don't climb up on the front of any of the equipment or heft your child up onto the front of the steam engine for that perfect photograph. Again, we want to be able to have fun here, so we've got to follow the number 1 rule, which is safety first. You're welcome to remain on board your train, but you'd be missing a large part of the experience, so I can't recommend enough alighting from the train. We'll have stairs up between coaches 1 and 2, and we'll have the ramp between coaches 2 and 3. So East Chattanooga Station will be open here. Souvenirs and refreshments available inside. We've got washrooms here. And we'll take the locomotive off the train, turn it around on our 1916 turntable, and then take you over to see our back shop where we maintain all of this vintage equipment. So, now, welcome to Chattanooga. We'll let you know when it's safe to alight. Thank you.
All the way down toward the end, past that locomotive. Thank you, guys. Watch the step, please. All right, folks. Unfortunately, Annie gets a road trip down that way. There we go. Watch the step, guys.
Yeah. There might be some stuff. Oh, that's cool.
train, folks. Let's go in on this. Go through a tunnel. Old train station. Bench. Here's where we're at. It's Chattanooga, Tennessee, at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. We're at the train shed where they do all the maintenance on all the trains. Good old 710. You'll get to see that here in a minute when I move the train. Ooh, look at that. You don't see those much nowadays. And you don't see those guys much nowadays either. We'll check those guys out in a minute. Here, this is the cool part. This is the cool part. There is an upcoming video for an aircraft carrier and some World War warships, hopefully. Look at that, folks. This is the cool part I was talking about.
Alright, come here. Don't touch. It says don't touch the road. It literally says back up behind the yellow line. Hurry, behind the yellow line.
Now that it seems most everyone's made their way down here, I'll tell you a little about this piece of machinery here. Turntables were used to turn locomotives around, as the name implies, in the days of steam locomotives. So at the coming of diesel locomotives, such as the 710, it is what we call a first-generation diesel locomotive. This is one of the diesels that doomed the steam engine to the pages of history. Turntables were phased out at all but a few major yards or terminals. You see, a steam locomotive generally carries the tender behind it. That's the car that carries the fuel. That might be coal, wood, oil, whatever the railway chose to use, as well as the water to make the steam. Whereas a diesel locomotive, the only difference between one end and the other is that the hood is longer on one end to accommodate the large diesel engine inside. Our engineer, Mr. Gordon, can see pretty much equally well out either direction, whereas the steam engine, you've got that tender behind it that's a lot of dead weight to shove, plus it's a visual obstruction, so steam locomotives really were intended to operate forwards. So turntables were used to turn them around. With the coming of diesel locomotives, all of this just becomes a lot of machinery and real estate that is tied up unnecessarily. So
as locomotives came about, turntables were therefore phased out at all but a few major yards or terminals. So this turntable, though, was made in the heyday of steam operation in 1916 by the American Bridge and Iron Company of Ambridge, Pennsylvania, and it was installed by the Central of Georgia Railway at their 7th Street locomotive repair shops in Macon. Now, although it is 80 feet in length, 80, less than a decade after they installed it, their locomotives at Macon were already too long to fit on it. So they moved it out to Cedartown, Georgia, to the end of a branch line where they used smaller elderly locomotives which would still fit on it. And it was used there until the end of steam, after which point it simply languished in the weeds until we acquired it in the late 1970s, moved it up here. We spent about $105,000 overhauling it, and we've been turning trains here since Independence Day of 1982. Now, a couple of things about the turntable may surprise you. As I mentioned, it's 80 feet in length. However, it weighs 80 tons. That's a ton a foot. To put that into comparison, the average school bus only weighs 11 to 13 tons, and the space shuttle only weighs 75 tons. So they then put their fuel and their cargo in the space shuttle. We then place our locomotive on the turntable. And our locomotive today, number 710, weighs around 120 tons. So we're talking about a total weight of 200 tons or 400,000 pounds. Now, when the turntable was new, they were turning steam engines, which they weighed over 200 tons in many cases on their own. So by the time you factor in the turntable's weight, you were talking about at or approaching 300 tons or 600,000 pounds. And you may think, well, why is the weight so important? Well, that's because this was constructed as an Armstrong turntable, meaning turned by hand. 4 railwaymen, 2 on either end, would push the turntable around. But we only have 2 railwaymen here today, and I'm over here running my yap, so I guess we'll solicit some volunteers from the audience to help us turn it around. Now, before anyone volunteers someone else, if you want to volunteer, whoever you're out here with, maybe your spouse or a significant other or something, you're just volunteering yourself if you do that. So before you do friends and family, keep that in mind. So show of hands, anyone willing to help today? Okay, got 1, 2, 3, okay, need 1 more. 4, there we go. Well, luckily for you, all you're going to be doing today is providing support, because we installed a 25 horsepower motor under the operator's house there that our trainman, Mr. Fields, is going to operate with the push of a button to turn this around. Liability insurance won't let us solicit volunteers anymore. However, there still are places where turntables are turned by hand, museums that when they solicit volunteers, they're dead serious. So the way Mr. Fields and his motor there, or 4 railwaymen could turn the table around, is that it balances on a giant 6-foot diameter ball bearing. So as the 710 rolls on, this end that I'm stood on will raise up, and when it balances, it'll dip back down, and that's our cue that we are ready to turn. Now, as the 710 rolls onto the turntable, we'll tell you a little about its history. It was built in 1950 by the Electromotive Division of General Motors, or EMD. That's the same GM that you all know that makes Cadillac, Chevrolet, and so forth. It was built for the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway, which by then was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Louisville and Nashville Railway, as a model GP7 locomotive, GP being general purpose, type 7. So you would think that was the 7th in the GP series. It was the first. But that meant they could be used in switching service, freight, or passenger service. Now, on the NC and St. L, the freight and switching locomotives were painted this red and yellow scheme, whilst the ones they used in passenger service were painted the same style, but used blue and silvery gray instead. And critically, they had a steam generator in the short hood. This was back in the days when all the coaches were a holdover from the days of steam engines, so the heat and the air conditioning, believe it or not, ran off of steam. So the passenger Jeeps had the steam generator in the short hood, whereas this one was not. It was used in freight service. In 1957, the Louisville and Nashville Railway fully absorbed the L&N, and during that absorption, this became the 1710 before becoming the L&N 478. Should have given a wave up there to our engineer, Mr. Gordon, on the locomotive today, getting us back and forth safely where we need to go. But this was used on the L&N until 1978, when it was involved in a head-on collision with another one of these Jeeps and was badly damaged and was written off for scrap. However, Amtrak stepped in and purchased it and totally rebuilt it. Now, during that rebuilding, they replaced the original diesel engine in here, which was a 1,500 horsepower 567 Type B engine. So each one of its 16 cylinders had 567 cubic inches of displacement. It was replaced with a 1,750 horsepower 567 Type C engine, making this now technically a GP9. Amtrak painted the engine all over orange as the 772, used it to pull maintenance or work trains on the Northeast Corridor until the turn of the millennium. When they retired it, we acquired it, and spent a number of years. Initially, we did some work pretty early on to return it to its original appearance, but it took 16 more years before we got the gyro lights on both ends. You see the protruding headlight up front. That's a mechanical signal light that they used to use back in the day. Very complicated, a lot of moving parts, so they got rid of them and just started putting blinking ditch lights on engines. So when we first restored the engine, we had one on the front, but it took us 16 more years to get one for the long hood there. That's a good so we've got our first no-hitter of the day. So the turntable is lined up using eyesight. No fancy lasers or stopping grooves or anything. It's lined up based on experience. So we brought our train in on track 1. Mr. Fields and Mr. Gordon are going to run the engine down track 2 to the other end of the yard, clear a switch, and then tie the locomotive back onto the other end of the train. So although coach 832 was the first coach on the way here, it'll be the trailing car, or the last car, on the way back. Now as the 710 is rolling off the turntable, that 567 diesel engine is not turning the wheels. This is a diesel-electric locomotive, as most diesel railway locomotives in fact are. So it turns a generator which produces 600 volts direct current, which is fed to traction motors on the axles, which actually propels the locomotive along. A few early ones were diesel mechanical or diesel hydraulic, but most have always been diesel electric. Just nowadays, modern engines use alternating current. They've got computer systems to make them much more efficient, and they have over 4,000 horsepower.
So folks, we are back, and now we're checking out the trains they got parked here down here at the shop
with these lovely ladies.
That's a good one. Southern. This one's a beautiful one. Blue, gold, navy colors. I actually rode on this one last time I was here.
That's right.
Steam locomotive.
Both of these locomotives were built for the Southern Railway over 1900, real operational coal-fired steam locomotives. The 630 was built in 1904. The Southern Railway ran for Southern Railway between 1904 and 1952, and between 1967 and 1978. And then came here to the museum, and we've had it here ever since. However, it went out of service in 1989, and it would not be until 2011 that it began operating under its own steam. We started working on it really heavily, shall we say, in 2001. So it took us 10 years to return that locomotive to operation. Southern Railway could have done that same job in about 30 days. So if anyone's curious why we don't run steam locomotives every day out here, that's one reason. They're very labor intensive and very expensive to run as well. Over that 10 years, I think we spent over $800,000
fixed and flexible, and depending on what kind of bolts your engine has, you might have a whole lot of stays that you're going to look at. Then every year you bring them here to the annual inspection, flush it out, take out, wash out, inspection plugs, take the steam gun apart. Steam will cut its way through brass and bronze over time. Some of you may know the story, Thomas Goes to Breakfast, the children's book there, where Thomas the Tank Engine takes off on his own and plows the map controller taps. On the Indian Railway Museum's prize steam engine took off on its own and plows the map it wasn't doing this time. And over time, steam will work its way through that throttle valve, so even if the throttle's closed, it will still emit steam to the wheel, which could let the engine go a number of things occur. So you want to latch that valve among other things at the annual inspection. Then every 92 operating days, we do a 92-day quarterly inspection. So that looks at things like the brakes. You'll see our air brake shop right back here. Now diesel locomotives have brakes as well, so you have to do a 92-day inspection on both a steam locomotive or a diesel locomotive. The brakes are operated by a compressor in the locomotive, and there's a tube between all the coaches, and that charges up a reservoir. You can see the reservoir on this one. And then on each car, you've got a brake cylinder, just like on the engine. The brake cylinder is right here behind the jack. And it pushes that piston out, which pushes the brake shoes right here against the wheel. Now, on a freight train, that's charged to 92 psi. On a passenger train, it's charged to 110 psi. But it is a fail-safe system. If you get a hole in that line, the train doesn't run away because there's no air for the brakes. The air is used to hold the brakes off. So if you get a hole, the train grinds to a halt. It doesn't run away. You have to do that on both steam or diesel. Done on a steam engine, every 31 service days, you have to do a boiler wash and bring them here, flush everything out. If you've ever tried to boil hard water in a pan or in a water heater or something, it'll rust out over time. So it's the same on steam engine. So you want to make sure that's not happening. So you have to do that. So they're very labor intensive. From the time we light the fire in it, we're looking at about 8 hours before the engine's actually ready to steam. So if we have a trip on Saturday morning, we light the fire on Friday morning. That way it has all day to warm up. You got to do a lot of lubrication. They are very labor intensive. Again, they're very historic. They're woven into every fiber of this country and most of what's considered the developed world. But there is very much a reason that the railways went to diesel locomotives. They're much less labor intensive. They're much more efficient. So that's the reason we don't run steam every day of the week out here, but we still keep it going. There are a number of towns, even major cities, that trace their origins back to railways in the steam era. Even Atlanta traces its origins back to Terminus, Georgia, the endpoint of the Western Atlantic. These engines used about 150 gallons of water for every mile that they go. So you've got to have regular water stops to fill them back up. Every couple hundred miles, you have to stop and lubricate them. So again, there's going to be a lot of towns that sprung up along the way to support that. Now, some of you might have said something as the real McCoy over the years. Well, that's after Elijah McCoy, a steam locomotive fireman who got tired of having to do all that lubricating, so he made a mechanical oil cup that as the rods on the engine turned, it would dispense lubrication that we didn't have to get out as much. Well, he was a working man. He was not helped in the 19th century. He was African American. A lot of people then would say, well, I can build one that's better than he could. But they never could. He knew what he was doing. He knew the conditions under which the equipment would have to perform in. So the McCoy oil cup became the industry standard on steam locomotives, stationary steam engines in places like power plants, factories, pumping stations, as well as on marine applications such as in steamships or steamboats. So steam engines are very, very historic. We operate them usually on weekends on the Missionary Ridge Local, and we have trips on our Somerville Steam Special. So, a real honest-to-goodness coal-fired steam engine. They burn 6 to 8 tons of coal a day, which when I started out here, coal was $50 a ton. It's now over $300 a ton. So steam engines are very expensive. Then behind me is the passenger coaches. Those are equally important because you can run the same engine, but put 3 different coaches behind it, you'll get 3 totally different experiences. Some of you today are riding the Nancy Hanks in Coach 907, which the 907, you see it outside, it's painted red there. Originally, it was painted the same blue and gray as Coach 390. Coach 390 was the first coach on the Nancy Hanks. It would have been right behind the engine. And the second coach, or sometimes the third coach, if they had another car in there, would have been the 907 out there. So it ran right behind this car here. And they originally were painted the same blue and gray scheme. And it is our hope and time to repaint the 907 back into this scheme as the Central Georgia 543, which was its original number. Behind that would have been the 660 series coaches, and we have the 661 sitting out in our Grand Junction yard right now. It also is used on our trips to Georgia, and on our Hiwassee River Scenic Railway, we operate coach 662. So to have that many coaches with one train. The only cars that we're missing would be the 663 and the 660. We were on the 660 at one point in total restoration, but that's
car behind me is built out of predominantly aluminum. It's what we call a lightweight car. So the old Pullmans of the early 1920s were built out of riveted steel and had a concrete floor, which meant they weighed between 80 and 100 tons. They started building cars out of Corten steel, lightweight steel, or stainless steel, and aluminum in the late 30s, early 40s. So this only weighs about 72 tons. It had air conditioning from the day it was new, hence the large picture windows, no little opening windows. You don't have to open the windows, it's got air conditioning and a flat roof. So this was used on the Nancy Hanks. Later, the Central Georgia Ride was taken over by the Southern Railway, and this was used as the rail fan recording cars on the Southern Steam Program trips in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, into the early 90s. You have engines like the 630 or the 4501 outside, and this would be the first car behind the tender. And they'd have the baggage doors open up front, letting everybody hang out and shoot video and audio recordings of the steam engines in operation. Eventually, when the steam program ended in 1994, the car was auctioned off, went up to the Western Maryland Scenic Railway out of Frostburg, Maryland, originally West Virginia, ran there until we did a trade and acquired it in 2018. We eventually restored the exterior to its original 1947 appearance. Now, a couple things to note. I mentioned the overhead crane up above. Well, it only lifts 10 tons. This is a lightweight car, and it still weighs over 70 tons. So it's easier for us to get down underneath it. That's why we have our inspection pit behind this car, so we can climb down under. Now, when we do have to lift a car, I always tell people we use these big yellow-orange hydraulic jacks, and they're usually way in the back down there. You can just see them, but you all are lucky because we've got an out to lift this car right here. So each one of those jacks will lift 35 tons. That's a considerable weight. That's 70,000 pounds. So both of these jacks together, just these two here, could lift the space shuttle. So we can change out brake shoes and change out wheels as needed. Behind me is the dining car over here, way at the back. That's number 3158. That is the dining car I mentioned that made meals for President Franklin Roosevelt on his trips to Warm Springs, and holds the moniker of being the oldest continuously operating dining car in the country. It was built by Pullman in 1924 for the Southern Railway, but you'd never know it because they totally stripped it down in 1949, and it is essentially a 1949 dining car inside a 1924 heavyweight frame. They stripped out all the wood paneling, the brass fixtures. That all was considered dated, which of course we'd love to have that today, but stripped all that out and turned it into a much more modern car that seats 48 as opposed to the original seating for 36, which was much more spread out, much more comfortable. But we do use that car regularly. Of course, it's in the shop for a little bit of maintenance right now. When you consider it's seen over 100 years of continuous service, it needs some work from time to time. We usually use it out on our dinner trains as well as on our trips into Georgia. Speaking of cars that the Southern Railway rebuilt, like they did that one at Hain Shops in Spartanburg, South Carolina, about 45 minutes from where I grew up. Right behind the 390 on the other side is office car number 21. So in the era before private jets, industrialists, politicians, corporate executives, they traveled by private rail car. The 21 over there was originally built by Pullman as a sleeping car in 1926 to Point Richmond. Well, in the 1930s and 40s, as I mentioned, you've got these lighter weight cars coming out, more modern air conditioning. And not to mention the fact that the new lightweight sleeping cars had bedrooms in them. The old heavyweight sleeping cars essentially only had bunk beds. They were called sections. They were bunk beds with a curtain for privacy, and that was it. So they sold a bunch of those cars off when the new lightweight cars came out. Southern Railway bought a number of them from Pullman, took them to Hain Shops, cut them down. Some of them were turned into coaches. We've got one of those on our dinner train right now, 1037. Some of them were turned into baggage cars. One of them was even turned into a safety assembly car that's essentially a rolling cinema or a rolling lecture hall. They covered over all the windows, and it's got the tiered seating inside, and they used it to show safety instructional films inside. And although that car is now privately owned, it is at Grand Junction. If you see the red coach sitting there with no windows down the side of it, that's it. The one over there, though, was rebuilt into an office car in 1956. So they cut open the back end to put that classic brass rail balcony on the back where you can imagine a politician making a whistle-stop speech. It's got 2 bedrooms in it, showers, a dining room, observation lounge, a little office area, a kitchen, as well as cruise quarters up front. So that's how executives travel. You must think, well, that must be our nicest car. Well, as I mentioned, though, it's the 98 out of Grand Junction. It's our nicest car. It's also an office car, but it was built new as an office car in 1917, right at the heart of Edwardian excess. So it had hanging chandeliers inside and mahogany paneling, whereas that's 1956, all about minimalism and mid-century modern. So we have both of those cars that people like you and 7 of your friends can hire out for the day. So you can ride like railroad big shots from
either the 1950s and 60s, you can put on your pocket protector and your metal framed glasses with your real thin tie and pretend you're an atomic age executive, or you can go ride the 98 with the tails and the top hat on, pretend that you're an Edwardian era baron back then. So it's just part of our goal here to keep as many different experiences as possible alive, and that's all made possible by people like you all coming out and riding. It's ticket sales and donations that have kept all of this going for over 60 years. So we'd have a way to do it, but we'd have no reason to do it and no money to do it if people didn't want to come learn about their history. And it's each and every one of your history, not just my history, that you all are keeping alive by coming out. This facility is what allows it. It's the, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the, I'm blanking on a word, I do apologize, but you all have the drive to make it happen. This is just the means that we're able to do it. And our wheel shop way in the back is the only one of its caliber in North America. There are 2 other places that have 2 of the 3 machines we have, but we're the only one that has all 3. So don't think that you're just keeping our own steam locomotives and equipment running. You're keeping ones from all over North America running. We've worked on steam engines from up in Alaska, from the Alaska Railroad, Canadian Pacific, up at Calgary, Alberta, Union Pacific, U.S. Sugar down in Florida, and pretty much everywhere in between. So, again, we're very fortunate to have all of this, and it's thanks to all of you coming out and riding that we're able to keep each and every one of your heritage, as well as our own, alive here. So, thank you very much. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and we'll start making our way back towards the train.
I got a question about that car back
Certainly,
there.
3158.
You said something about the president, right?
Oh, you made meals for President Franklin Roosevelt on his trips to Warm Springs, yes.
Where I used to live, there's a Coast Guard base there. U.S. Coast Guard station in Elizabeth City. And during the 30s, when that base was opening, Roosevelt personally came and actually visited the base. There's actually a picture of him in the local museum there, of him in his car going through downtown.
Probably the Ferdinand Magellan. What year, do you know what year he came to the base?
Before
or after 42?
Before World War II, the base was opened in 1939.
Okay, so that would not have likely been the Magellan. It could have been. He had a number of Pullmans, private cars that they offered out for lease that all were from the Great Traveler series. So they were named for explorers, if you will. Magellan, Robert Peary, Roald Atkinson, things like that. But in 1942, they armor-plated the Magellan solely for his usage. But before 42, I can't say offhand which one it would have been. But, thank you for coming out and visiting today.
Welcome. And now we're walking back to the train. I will put a link to their website, so if you want to donate to this amazing museum, feel free. They would love your support. Who knows? I already teased us, but we got a, hopefully, we're going to have a video coming out in maybe June or late May for USS Yorktown. Amazing museum staff.
Thank you, appreciate it, buddy.
Center car, really in the process of being restored. Now we're walking back on the train. Well, folks, this is the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Hope y'all enjoy it. Have a great day, everybody.